My older sister was already unpacking her clothes into my bedroom, before anyone bothered asking whether she could move into my home. She stood beside my walk-in closet holding one of my dresses against herself, while two movers carried boxes past her. My father watched with quiet satisfaction. When he noticed me standing in the doorway, he smiled as though I had arrived just in time for a pleasant surprise. "There you are," he said. "Victoria needs this place more than you do." Before I could answer, he reached into his jacket pocket and tossed my emergency key toward my sister. She caught it effortlessly. "Now you won't have to keep borrowing Dad's." The two of them acted as though ownership had already changed. As though I were the guest, Victoria walked past me without even saying hello. She pointed toward my home office. "Those shelves can come out." Then she turned to the movers. "The larger bedroom is mine." Dad nodded approvingly. "Danielle is barely home anyway." For a few seconds, I simply watched. 10 years earlier, Victoria had blamed me for a scandal she created. I lost my first engineering position. My father believed her, and I spent years rebuilding a career she nearly destroyed. Now, she was standing inside my home with the exact same confidence. The confidence of someone who had never been forced to face consequences. Neither of them knew one important detail. Penthouse 2500 wasn't an executive apartment my company rented. It belonged to a holding company I personally controlled. More importantly, every hallway, every elevator, every copied key, every network login, every connected device inside that residence was automatically recorded. I slowly pulled out my phone. My father frowned. "What are you doing?" I looked directly at him. "I'm protecting my property." Then I pressed the call button. "This is Danielle Carter. I'm the owner of Aldercrown Towers. I have unauthorized occupants entering Penthouse 2500. Everything changed. Dad's face went pale. Victoria stopped halfway down the hallway. For the first time all morning, neither of them looked certain anymore. Then my eyes drifted toward the dining table. My work laptop was open. I knew I had locked it before leaving for my morning meeting. An unfamiliar flash drive was plugged into its side. Victoria followed my gaze. Without saying a word, she quietly slipped the flash drive into her pocket. That tiny movement told me something far more frightening than the attempted takeover of my home. They hadn't come only for my apartment. They had come for something inside it. Before I tell you why that flash drive contained confidential engineering files worth nearly $18 million, and why my own father begged me not to call the police, let me ask you something. What would you do if the people who claimed to love you believed they had more rights to your home than you did? People often think the worst kind of betrayal begins with a lie. In my experience, it usually begins with an expectation. The expectation that you'll understand, that you'll make another sacrifice, that you'll quietly accept one more unfair decision because family comes first. By the time my father handed my emergency key to my sister, that expectation had been growing for more than 20 years. My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 34 years old, a structural engineer by training, and the founder of a company that designs adaptive emergency evacuation systems for high-rise buildings. Most people assume my work revolves around blueprints. It doesn't. My work is about human behavior, what people do when panic replaces logic, how buildings can guide frightened strangers toward safety before they even realize they're making decisions. Every system we build depends on one principle. Access matters. The wrong person entering the wrong place at the wrong moment can put thousands of lives at risk. Ironically, I built secure systems for cities long before I learned how to build healthy boundaries for myself. My company occupied several floors inside Aldercrown Towers. The penthouse on the 25th floor served as my home. Most employees believed I rented it as part of my executive compensation package. Very few people knew the truth. 5 years earlier, after helping redesign the tower's integrated emergency guidance network, I had accepted partial ownership through a holding company instead of a larger cash payout. It was the biggest financial risk I had ever taken. Everyone around me thought I was making a mistake. Everyone except one person. Me. I believed in the building because I believed in the people working inside it. Every sensor, every backup server, every encrypted access log, every security protocol. I knew them better than anyone because I had helped design many of them. That knowledge would eventually save far more than my apartment. It would save my company, my reputation, and 43 employees who had no idea their livelihoods were about to become collateral damage in a family conflict. Growing up, however, none of those accomplishments mattered very much. Inside my family, our identities had already been assigned long before either Victoria or I became adults. Victoria was the daughter who needed protecting. I was the daughter who could handle disappointment. It sounded harmless when people described us that way. Even affectionate. Victoria's just more sensitive. Danielle's always been so independent. Your sister feels everything so deeply. You're strong enough to understand. Those sentences followed me through childhood, then high school, then college. Eventually they became invisible. I stopped hearing compliments. I started living inside expectations. If Victoria forgot something, I was expected to fix it. If she made a mistake, I was expected to forgive it. If resources were limited, mine somehow became negotiable. Not because anyone officially decided they should be. Because everyone quietly assumed I would say yes. The strange thing is, for years I believed that was what love looked like. Not being chosen. Being dependable. Only much later did I understand something painfully simple. Dependability without boundaries eventually teaches people that your life belongs to them. Victoria was 4 years older than I was. If you met us separately, you probably would have assumed she was the more confident sister. She had an effortless charm that made strangers feel as though they had known her for years. She remembered birthdays. She complimented people naturally. She could tell a funny story so well that an entire dinner table would forget why they had been upset only minutes before. She knew exactly how to become the center of a room. I admired that about her when we were children. Back then, I believed confidence and kindness were the same thing. I didn't understand that some people learn to use warmth as a shortcut to trust. Our mother used to joke that Victoria could probably talk her way out of a speeding ticket. Dad always laughed. So could you, he'd tell her. You just have better reasons. I wasn't jealous. Not then. Victoria genuinely seemed to need more attention than I did. She cried harder after disappointments. Celebrated louder after successes. If she scraped her knee, the entire afternoon revolved around comforting her. If I scraped mine, Dad would smile proudly. You're tough. It wasn't cruelty. At least, it didn't feel like cruelty. It simply became our family's rhythm. Victoria received protection. I received expectations. After our mother passed away during my second year of college, that rhythm only grew stronger. Dad was devastated. He buried himself in work, home repairs, and anything that kept him from sitting alone with his grief. Victoria responded differently. She drifted between jobs. Started ambitious plans that rarely lasted. Needed help paying rent. Needed help replacing cars. Needed help recovering from relationships that somehow always ended with someone else at fault. Dad stepped in every single time. Not because she manipulated him. At least, that's what I believed then. Because he couldn't bear the thought of losing anyone else. Whenever I questioned another rescue, he always answered with the same sentence. Your sisters had a harder time. I never argued. Grief isn't a competition. People survive it differently, so I kept working. While Victoria searched for herself, I built my career one project at a time. Long nights, weekend site visits, professional licensing exams, endless revisions. Engineering isn't glamorous. Most victories arrive quietly. A bridge that stands. A building that performs exactly as designed. A safety system no one notices because nothing goes wrong. I loved that. The work wasn't about recognition. It was about responsibility. At 26, after surviving a hotel fire during a business conference, that responsibility became personal. The emergency exit signs directed hundreds of guests toward a smoke-filled stairwell. Several people were injured before firefighters redirected everyone. I kept thinking about one question afterward. Why were static signs making decisions during a situation that changed every second? That question eventually became the foundation of my company. Adaptive evacuation systems. Digital pathways that could redirect people in real time based on heat, smoke, structural damage, and crowd movement. Most investors dismiss the idea. Too expensive, too complicated, too ambitious. I kept building anyway. For nearly 12 years, every promotion, every contract, and every sleepless night moved me one step closer to proving that the technology worked. Eventually, it did. Our systems began appearing in hospitals, corporate campuses, airports, residential towers, including Aldercrown. The day I signed the ownership agreement for the penthouse, Dad hugged me. I always knew you'd do something important. I smiled. For a long time, I held on to those words. Only later did I realize something. He had always been proud of what I accomplished. He simply never believed those accomplishments belonged completely to me. Inside his mind, anything I built remained available whenever Victoria needed another fresh start. I didn't see it yet. Not completely. But looking back now, that ownership agreement wasn't the beginning of the conflict. It was the first thing my family believed they had a right to redistribute. The first time Victoria destroyed part of my life, she cried. That's what everyone remembered. Not what she had done. Only how devastated she looked afterward. I was 24 years old and had just landed my first engineering position with a respected structural design firm in Denver. It wasn't my dream job, but it was the opportunity every young engineer hopes for. Real projects, experienced mentors, a chance to prove that all those sleepless nights in college had been worth something. I rented a tiny apartment close enough to walk to work. The furniture came from thrift stores. My dining table doubled as a drafting desk. Most evenings, I stayed late reviewing calculations simply because I loved learning from the senior engineers. For the first time in my life, everything felt like it was moving in the right direction. Around that same time, Victoria began dating a regional executive from another engineering company. She described him as charming, successful, ambitious. She never mentioned one important detail. He was married. I didn't discover that until months later. Occasionally she asked if she could borrow my apartment while I worked late. She claimed her own neighbors complained about visitors. Sometimes she borrowed my laptop because hers was running too slowly. And none of it seemed unusual. She was my sister. Trust rarely announces itself while it's being abused. Then everything collapsed. One Monday morning, my department manager asked me to step into a conference room before I had even logged into my computer. Human Resources was already waiting. So was someone from corporate compliance. They showed me several confidential emails that had been sent from my company account. Messages discussing internal project information, private conversations, personal comments directed toward Victoria's boyfriend. I stared at the screen. I didn't write these. The compliance officer remained polite. I'm sure this is stressful. But the messages originated from your credentials. I repeated the same sentence. I didn't send them. By lunchtime, my company laptop had been confiscated. By the end of the week, my employment contract had been terminated. Not because anyone proved malicious intent. Because the company considered me a reputational risk while the investigation continued. I drove home in complete silence. I don't remember most of that evening. Only the overwhelming feeling that something impossible had happened. The next morning, Dad arrived unexpectedly. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask what the company had told me. He walked into my apartment already convinced he knew the truth. Victoria told me everything. I looked at him in confusion. What did she say? She said you became obsessed with that man. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so absurd my mind couldn't process it. Dad, I've met him twice. He shook his head. She's terrified. She said you've been jealous of her for years. I stared at him, waiting. Surely he would realize how ridiculous it sounded. Instead, he kept talking. You've always hidden your feelings. Maybe you didn't even realize what you were doing. Every word hurt more than the last. Not because he was accusing me. Because he truly believed he was being reasonable. I begged him to wait until the company's investigation finished. To let the forensic team examine the login history. To ask questions before deciding who had lied. Victoria stood behind him in my tiny apartment, crying. She never denied a single accusation. She simply let him speak for her. For 11 days, I believed my career was over. Then the company's cybersecurity team completed its investigation. The emails had not been sent from my office, or my phone, or even while I was awake. They originated from my apartment, using my laptop, during evenings when Victoria had borrowed it. Server logs, device fingerprints, network records. Technology accomplished what my own voice could not. It proved I had been telling the truth all along. The company quietly admitted the evidence cleared me. But the position had already been filled. The opportunity was gone. Dad called a few days later. For one brief moment, I thought he was finally going to apologize. Instead, he sighed and said, Victoria was frightened. She made a mistake. Let's not keep reopening old wounds. Old wounds. As though they belonged equally to both of us. As though losing my career and falsely accusing someone were simply different versions of the same unfortunate misunderstanding. I didn't argue. Not anymore. I simply found another job. Started over. And slowly rebuilt everything that had been taken. What I never rebuilt was the certainty that my father would believe me before believing the daughter who cried the loudest. Looking back now, I realized something important. The day he asked me to let it go, he unknowingly taught Victoria the most dangerous lesson of her life, that tears could erase consequences, and that someone else would always pay the price. For almost 10 years, nothing happened. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Victoria drifted from one opportunity to another. A marketing startup that lasted 8 months, a consulting agency that disappeared before its first anniversary, a luxury real estate office she claimed was beneath her abilities. Every time one chapter ended, another crisis appeared. Rent, car payments, credit cards, another breakup, another promise that this time everything would finally change. Dad always stepped in. Sometimes with money, sometimes with advice, sometimes simply by convincing everyone else that Victoria deserved another chance. I stopped arguing years earlier, not because I agreed, because experience had taught me something. People rarely abandon the stories that help them sleep at night. Dad's story was simple. Victoria struggled because life had been unfair. Daniel succeeded because life had been easier. Neither belief was true. But together, they justified every unequal decision that followed. While Victoria searched for stability, I kept building mine. EvacuPath Systems slowly expanded from 12 employees to 20, then 28, then 43. Winning contracts became less about convincing clients our technology worked and more about proving we could protect information no competitor could access. Everything inside our company revolved around trust. Encrypted servers, restricted credentials, layered authorization, independent audits. Most people think cybersecurity exists only to stop anonymous hackers halfway around the world. They rarely imagine the greatest vulnerability might arrive carrying your last name. About 6 months before everything happened, our largest opportunity finally arrived. Meridian Transit Authority, an infrastructure modernization project spanning dozens of transportation hubs. If we won the bid, it would become the largest contract in company history, nearly $18 million. But for me, the number mattered less than the purpose. Thousands of commuters would eventually rely on systems my team designed. Every successful proposal meant more than revenue. It meant people getting home safely. That responsibility never felt ordinary. During those same months, I noticed Victoria calling Dad more frequently. Sometimes 3 or 4 times a day. He always stepped outside to answer. Whenever I visited his house, conversation stopped as I entered the room. I assumed they were discussing another breakup, another financial problem, another rescue mission. I never imagined those quiet phone calls would eventually lead straight to my front door. Then one Saturday afternoon, Dad invited me over for lunch. Victoria arrived nearly 40 minutes late. Designer sunglasses rested on top of her head despite the cloudy weather. She smiled brightly, hugged me, and acted as though we had never experienced years of distance. Lunch was pleasant enough. We talked about movies, travel, my latest project. Nothing unusual. Until dessert. Victoria casually mentioned that her lease would expire soon. Dad immediately looked concerned. What happened? She sighed dramatically. The landlord's selling the building. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. She nodded. I'll figure something out. Dad glanced toward me. Just for a second, long enough that something inside me became uneasy. What? I asked. He smiled too quickly. Nothing. The conversation moved on, or at least, everyone pretended it had. A week later, Victoria announced online that her 6-year relationship had ended. The posts painted a familiar picture. Heartbreak, betrayal, starting over. Friends filled the comments with sympathy. Dad called me that evening. Your sister's having a difficult time, I saw. She'll need support. I hope she has good friends around her. Silence. Then he cleared his throat. I was thinking. Those 3 words instantly transported me back through years of similar conversations. I already knew what would come next. Only this time, neither of us realized just how expensive his request was about to become. 3 days later, I left for an early meeting with Meridian's procurement committee. Everything went well. The presentation finished ahead of schedule. The committee asked thoughtful questions. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe we might actually win the contract. I drove back toward Aldercrown Towers feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The elevator carried me to the 25th floor. The doors opened, and I immediately heard unfamiliar voices. Cardboard scraping across hardwood floors. Furniture being moved. Someone laughing inside my home. When I rounded the corner, two movers were carrying boxes toward my bedroom. Victoria stood beside my closet giving instructions, and my father was holding my spare key, as though he had every right in the world to decide who belonged inside my home. For a few long seconds, no one acknowledged that I had just come home. The movers continued carrying boxes through my hallway. Victoria stood in the middle of my bedroom with one hand resting on the bed frame, as though she were already deciding where new furniture should go. Dad was explaining where the larger dresser could fit. It looked less like a visit, and more like a completed decision. Finally, he noticed me. There you are. His voice carried the same calm confidence he used whenever he believed a conversation had already been settled. We've been trying to reach you. I glanced at my phone. No missed calls. No messages. You didn't. Victoria smiled sympathetically. We knew you'd overthink everything. I stared at her. I'm looking at movers inside my home. I don't think I'm the one overthinking. Dad sighed heavily. Exactly the way he had when I was a teenager questioning another favor I was expected to accept. Victoria needs stability. I know she had a difficult breakup. It's more than that. He folded his arms. She lost her apartment, I heard. And she needs somewhere peaceful while she gets back on her feet. I nodded slowly. Then she should find somewhere peaceful. Dad frowned. That's exactly what we're doing. No, I answer what you're doing. Neither of them seemed to understand the difference. Victoria stepped toward me. It'll only be temporary. How long? She hesitated. A few months, Dad interrupted. However long she needs. There it was. Not a request. Not a discussion. An open-ended decision about my home. Made without me. I looked around the penthouse. Boxes already lined the hallway. My office door stood open. One mover carried framed photographs toward the guest room. Another wheeled in garment racks covered with Victoria's clothes. She hadn't packed for a visit. She had packed for a relocation. When exactly were you planning to ask me? Dad looked genuinely confused. We didn't think asking would change anything. The sentence landed harder than either of them realized. Not because it was cruel, because it was honest. My opinion had never been part of the plan. In their minds. My agreement already existed. It simply hadn't been spoken aloud yet. I walked slowly toward my office. Victoria moved almost instinctively to block the doorway. You don't need to go in there. I work in there. I was just looking around, so step aside. For one brief moment, neither of us moved. Then she shifted just enough for me to enter. Everything appeared normal at first glance. Books, drawings, dual monitors, coffee mug, notebook. Then my eyes settled on the dining table beside the office entrance. My company laptop. The screen was awake. I knew with absolute certainty I had locked it before leaving from my Meridian meeting. Next to it sat an unfamiliar black flash drive. Its tiny indicator light was still blinking. Freshly connected. Freshly used. Victoria followed my gaze. Before I could reach the table, she quietly picked up the drive. You brought a flash drive into my office? I was printing resumes. I looked around. There isn't a printer connected to this computer. Silence. Dad stepped forward immediately. Danielle, don't interrogate your sister. I'm asking one question. She doesn't need to explain herself. I looked from him to the flash drive still clenched in Victoria's hand. Every instinct I had developed after years of protecting confidential engineering projects suddenly came alive. People who have nothing to hide rarely rush to remove storage devices. People who are telling the truth rarely position themselves between you and your own computer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. Instead, I slowly reached into my pocket and unlocked my phone. Dad's expression changed. What are you doing now? I looked directly at him. The same thing I do whenever someone enters a secured property without authorization. Then I pressed the call button for the building's front desk. Everything that happened next would turn what my father believed was a simple family disagreement into a criminal investigation that reached far beyond the walls of my penthouse. The security officers arrived in less than 4 minutes. One advantage of living inside a building you helped design is knowing exactly how long emergency response should take. The elevator doors opened. Two uniformed officers stepped out alongside the property manager. He looked directly at me. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter. How would you like us to proceed?" That single sentence changed the atmosphere inside the penthouse. Until then, my father had been speaking with complete confidence. Victoria had been directing movers through my home as though she already owned it. Now both of them understood something they had somehow forgotten. This wasn't my father's house. It wasn't family property. It wasn't even company housing. It was legally mine. Dad recovered first. I'm her father. The property manager smiled politely. "I understand, sir. But you're not listed as an authorized resident." His expression hardened. "I have a key." "You had a key." The manager glanced toward me. "Miss Carter deactivated it 2 minutes ago." Dad instinctively reached into his pocket and removed the emergency key. He stared at it. The tiny green access light that normally flashed every few seconds had already gone dark. For the first time that afternoon, he realized he wasn't controlling the situation anymore. Victoria folded her arms. "This is ridiculous. I was only moving in temporarily." "No," I answered calmly. "You were moving in permanently." She laughed. "Don't be dramatic." I pointed toward the hallway. 12 moving boxes, 3 garment racks, kitchen appliances, bathroom supplies, 2 movers. Temporary doesn't usually require an inventory. Neither of them answered. The property manager quietly asked the movers to pause while ownership of the residence was clarified. Both men immediately stepped away from the boxes. One even apologized. "We were told this was a family move." "It is," I replied. "Just not an authorized one." Dad looked genuinely offended. "So you're humiliating your own family in front of strangers?" I met his eyes. "No. I'm preventing strangers from watching my family take something that doesn't belong to them." Silence settled over the room. Victoria suddenly lifted her phone. Within seconds, the front-facing camera appeared on the screen. I recognized that expression immediately. The tears, the slightly trembling lower lip, the carefully measured breathing. She had rehearsed this before. "Hi, everyone." Her voice became noticeably softer. "I wasn't planning to share this today, but I honestly don't know where else to turn." She slowly turned the camera toward herself, making certain the security officers remained outside the frame. "My little sister just threw me out after I escaped an abusive relationship." She sniffled. "I don't even have a safe place to sleep tonight." Comments began appearing almost instantly. Stay strong. Family should never do this. Says sending love." She continued speaking. "I never imagined success would change someone this much." Not one word about the movers. Not one word about the copied key. Not one word about entering my home without permission. Only the version that made her appear abandoned. Within minutes, my phone began vibrating. An aunt, then a cousin, then another relative. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched Victoria carefully adjust the camera angle whenever someone accidentally walked behind her. She wasn't documenting reality. She was directing it. When she finally lowered the phone, she smiled almost imperceptibly. "There. Now people know the truth." I looked at her for several seconds. "No, they know your version." The property manager quietly cleared his throat. "Miss Carter, would you like us to remove the unauthorized occupants now?" I looked around my home. Boxes, suitcases, my father, my sister. Then my eyes settled once again on the black flash drive still resting inside Victoria's hand. Something about it continued bothering me, not because she possessed it, because she refused to let go of it. "You have 15 minutes, I said calmly. "Remove every box, return my access card, and hand me the flash drive." Victoria instinctively closed her fist. "It's mine." I nodded. "Then you'll have no objection to explaining why it was connected to my encrypted company laptop." For the first time since I had walked through the front door, the confidence disappeared from her face. Only for a second. But I saw it. People lie with remarkable confidence. Until you ask the one question they weren't expecting. And suddenly, the conversation isn't about family anymore. It's about evidence. The moment the elevator doors closed behind my father and Victoria, the silence inside the penthouse felt almost unnatural. Only minutes earlier, strangers had been carrying boxes through my hallway. Now, the only sound came from the city's distant traffic 5 floors below. I didn't waste time. Instead of inserting the flash drive into my work laptop, I walked into the small cybersecurity room adjacent to my office. Most visitors assumed it was a storage closet. In reality, it housed an isolated workstation completely disconnected from my company's internal network. Every unknown device went there first. No exceptions. Experience had taught me that curiosity is expensive. Preparation is cheaper. I slipped the flash drive into the isolated computer. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then folders began appearing across the screen. At first glance, they looked ordinary. Project schedules, engineering drawings, budget estimates. But one folder immediately caught my attention. Meridian Transit Authority. My stomach tightened. I clicked it open. Dozens of copied files appeared. Architectural models, bid projections, structural simulations, preliminary pricing documents. Everything related to the largest contract in my company's history. Nearly $18 million. I opened another directory. Internal design revisions, confidential testing reports, fire evacuation algorithms. Not copied completely, but enough to expose months of engineering work. I leaned back slowly. Victoria hadn't been looking for somewhere to live. She had been looking for somewhere to steal. I immediately disconnected the drive and created a forensic image before opening another single file. Rule number 1. Never investigate original evidence. Always preserve it first. While the duplicate copied, I opened my company laptop and reviewed the security logs. Every external device leaves fingerprints. Connection time, device identification, attempted transfers, user activity. The timeline unfolded almost immediately. A CO841A emitters laptop awakened. FASIO A40 was unknown USB connected. HASO 84 Street restricted folders accessed. ICO 84 season bulk copy request initiated. ISO 84 Z transfer interrupted. I frowned. Interrupted. Something had stopped the process. Then I remembered. My morning meeting with Meridian had finished earlier than expected. I had arrived home almost 30 minutes sooner than planned. If traffic had delayed me, Victoria might have copied everything. A quiet chill settled across my shoulders. Sometimes luck looks remarkably similar to preparation. I continued reviewing the logs. Another alert appeared. See unauthorized network authorization attempt, device unknown iPhone. Status rejected. Victoria hadn't only copied files. She had tried to register her phone as a trusted device inside my private residential network. If successful, she could have returned remotely without ever touching my laptop again. Whoever planned this understood technology far better than I had ever given my sister credit for, or someone else was helping her. I immediately exported every log, twice. One encrypted backup remained on an external drive. Another uploaded to secure cloud storage. Only after both copies were complete did I allow myself to breathe. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. A notification from social media. Victoria had already uploaded another video. This time she stood in the lobby of Aldercrown Towers, smiling, holding an access card toward the camera. Don't worry, she told thousands of viewers. I'll be back home soon. I instinctively reached into my wallet. The slot behind my driver's license was empty. My building access card was gone. I replayed the security footage from the lobby, then checked the building access records. Victoria had entered the penthouse exactly 27 minutes before I returned. Dad had used the emergency key. Victoria had used my stolen access card. Inside those 27 minutes, she connected the flash drive, opened confidential project folders, photographed printed engineering documents, attempted to authorize her phone, and quietly removed my building credentials. This hadn't been a desperate sister looking for shelter. It had been a carefully timed operation. One plan down to the minute. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me focused. Family conflicts are emotional. Corporate espionage is methodical. I was no longer dealing with hurt feelings. I was dealing with evidence. And evidence always leaves a trail. The only question now was where that trail would lead next. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I called Ethan Brooks instead. Some people collect friends because they make life more enjoyable. I collected a few because they made difficult situations easier to understand. Ethan had spent nearly 15 years as an investigative journalist before leaving the profession to work as an independent corporate risk consultant. He wasn't cynical. He was careful. Years of exposing corruption had taught him that the first version of every story usually benefits the person speaking the loudest. Whenever I found myself standing too close to a problem, Ethan helped me step back far enough to see the pattern. We met that evening at a small Korean restaurant a few blocks from my office. Neither of us ordered immediately. I placed the flash drive sealed inside an evidence bag on the table between us. He looked at it, then at me. Tell me everything. So I did. The movers. Dad. The emergency key. Victoria's live stream. The copied files. The stolen access card. The attempted network registration. I spoke for nearly 30 minutes without interruption. Ethan never reached for the flash drive, he simply listened. When I finished, he folded his hands together. What do you think this is? Corporate theft. He nodded slowly. I agree. But I think it's something else too. What? He leaned back in his chair. I don't think your sister suddenly woke up understanding encrypted engineering data. I frowned. You think someone coached her? I think someone gave her a shopping list. The sentence stayed with me, because it explained something that had bothered me all afternoon. Victoria wasn't an engineer. She wouldn't know which folders mattered. She wouldn't recognize preliminary bid models from routine design files. Someone had told her exactly what to copy. Ethan reached for his notebook. What was her boyfriend's name? Lucas Warren. He stopped writing, then looked up again. Lucas Warren. You know him. Not personally. He frowned. But the name sounds familiar. He opened his laptop and searched through an old archive of reporting notes. After a minute, he found something. There, he turned the screen toward me. Asked Northline Urban Systems, a private redevelopment company. Nearly 18 months earlier, confidential planning documents had leaked before a multi-million-dollar proposal was submitted. The company never publicly explained what happened. Ethan tapped one paragraph. A source told me someone close to an employee had copied restricted files. I felt my stomach tighten. Lucas worked there. Ethan nodded. He wasn't accused, but someone using his home computer accessed protected material. I looked at him carefully. Victoria lived with him. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Ethan closed the laptop. The relationship ended shortly afterward. Publicly, people said it was a breakup. He paused. My reporting suggested something different. What? They believed someone inside his apartment had been selling access to confidential proposals. I stared silently at the table. Another company, another leak, another career nearly destroyed. The similarities were impossible to ignore. What happened to Lucas? He resigned. No criminal charges. Northline settled quietly. Too much bad publicity. I looked at the evidence bag again. So she already knew this worked. Ethan nodded. Or she learned there were very few consequences. That possibility frightened me more than anything else. People don't always repeat harmful behavior because they're malicious. Sometimes they repeat it because history taught them someone else will clean up the damage. Ethan watched me carefully. Don't confront her. I wasn't planning to. Good, because if she's working with someone, the moment she realizes you know, they'll change tactics. I smiled faintly. You always make everything sound like an investigation. He returned the smile. That's because it is. As we finished dinner, he asked one final question. Who benefits if your company loses the Meridian contract? I answered almost immediately. Harborline Dynamics. He nodded once. Then that's where I'd start looking. Driving home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about his words. I had spent the entire day believing my sister wanted my penthouse. Now, I wasn't sure the apartment had ever been the real objective. Maybe it had simply been the easiest doorway into something much larger. And if that was true, someone outside my family had already stepped through it. The following morning, my father called before 8. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice sounded calmer than it had the day before. Almost rehearsed. I've been thinking. That's good. I don't appreciate the sarcasm. I wasn't being sarcastic. A long pause settled between us. Finally, he sighed. Victoria made a mistake. I looked out the window toward the skyline. No, she made several hundred decisions. What does that mean? It means connecting a flash drive, opening confidential folders, removing my access card, attempting to authorize her phone. Those aren't accidents. He immediately defended her. She told me she opened the wrong files. I closed my eyes. Dad, my fire evacuation algorithms aren't stored beside our ASIMA templates. Silence. Then came the sentence I had heard in one form or another my entire life. You always assume the worst about your sister. I almost answered emotionally. Almost. Instead, I walked into my office and opened the security timeline. I don't have to assume. I have logs. He didn't respond. The system records every folder she accessed. Every minute she spent inside my office. Every device she connected. You think computers know everything? No. They simply remember better than people. Another silence. I realized he wasn't calling to understand what had happened. He was calling to discover how much I knew. When the conversation ended, I immediately saved the recording beside the rest of my evidence. Experience had taught me that today's denial often becomes tomorrow's contradiction. Around lunchtime, I returned to Aldercrown Towers expecting a quiet afternoon. Instead, music echoed down the hallway before the elevator doors had fully opened. Laughter. Champagne glasses clinking. Someone shouting, "This view is incredible!" I stopped walking. The sound was coming from my penthouse. For one impossible second, I wondered whether I had entered the wrong floor. Then I noticed my front door standing open. People wandered in and out carrying drinks. Someone leaned against my balcony taking selfies. A woman I had never seen before sat on my living room sofa scrolling through her phone. None of them looked surprised to be there. I walked inside slowly. Every instinct told me not to react. Not yet. Victoria appeared from my kitchen wearing my white bathrobe. She smiled brightly. "Oh, you came home early." As though she had merely borrowed the place for an afternoon, not broken into it. Not after security had already escorted her out the previous day. I looked around carefully. My locked wine cabinet stood open. Several bottles rested on the counter. One guest examined the prototype evacuation display I kept for demonstrations. Another had moved framed engineering awards off a shelf to make room for decorations. No one appeared frightened. Because Victoria had told them they belonged there. I quietly opened the building management app on my phone. Instead of calling anyone directly, I activated the property's incident documentation protocol. Within seconds, the property manager received an automatic priority alert. Security cameras throughout the common areas shifted into evidence preservation mode. Every elevator, every hallway, every entrance, every departure, nothing would be overwritten. Only then did I speak. "Victoria." She turned toward me casually. "Yes. Who are these people?" "My friends, I can see that." "Why are they inside my home?" She laughed softly. "I told you. I'm staying here. So I thought everyone could help me celebrate a fresh start." One woman nearby frowned. "Wait." She looked between us. "You mean, this isn't your apartment?" Victoria's smile faltered. "Only slightly." Before she could answer, the property manager entered with 2 security officers. His tone remained perfectly professional. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter. I've already started documenting today's unauthorized gathering." The room went completely silent. Guests looked at one another in confusion. A man holding a champagne bottle slowly lowered it. Someone whispered, "I thought her dad owned this place." Another guest quietly placed her drink on the counter. Within minutes, people began apologizing. Several explained they genuinely believed Victoria lived there. Others admitted she claimed I had already agreed. No one wanted to remain. One by one, they walked toward the elevators. Victoria watched her audience disappear. For the first time, she had no one left to perform for. Only me, only the evidence, and only the consequences waiting just outside the front door. After the last guest left, the penthouse finally became quiet again. The silence felt heavier this time, not peaceful. Deliberate. Almost as though the apartment itself had been holding its breath. The property manager remained beside the dining table, documenting the damage while one of the security officers photographed every room. Broken wine cabinet. Scratches across the hardwood floor. Open storage drawers. Boxes that had somehow returned after being removed only hours earlier. Nothing dramatic, just dozens of small violations that together told a much larger story. Victoria stood near the balcony with her arms crossed. For the first time all day, she wasn't speaking. She wasn't crying. She wasn't recording herself. She was thinking. That worried me more than any argument could have. While the inventory continued, I walked into my office. Everything appeared untouched. At least, until I noticed a large manila envelope resting on the corner of my desk. I knew immediately it didn't belong there. The paper was new. The edges perfectly straight. Across the front, a printed logo caught my attention. AS Harborline Dynamics. That's where my pulse slowed instead of quickening. When something stops surprising you, it's usually because the pattern has already revealed itself. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were several printed spreadsheets, projected bid values, material estimates, scheduling assumptions. Attached to the top was a handwritten note. Dinner Thursday. Ves bring the latest numbers. I read it twice, then looked toward Victoria. She had quietly appeared in the doorway. Before I could ask a single question, she stepped forward and reached for the envelope. That's private. I gently pulled it away. You left it on my desk. It isn't yours. Then why is it inside my office? No answer. Instead, she looked toward the hallway where security continued documenting the apartment. For the first time, she seemed uncertain, not frightened, calculating, almost as though she was deciding which version of the truth still had a chance of surviving. Ethan's warning echoed inside my mind. Don't confront her until you understand exactly what you're looking at. So I didn't. I simply slipped the envelope into a clear evidence sleeve. The property manager watched quietly. Would you like me to add that to today's inventory? Yes. He photographed both the envelope and the handwritten note before sealing the evidence bag. Victoria finally found her voice. You're making everything look criminal. I looked at her calmly. I didn't write the note. I didn't place it on my desk. I didn't invite strangers into my home. If this looks criminal, I paused. Perhaps you should ask yourself why. She looked away. A few minutes later, security escorted her toward the elevator, for the second time in less than 24 hours. As she passed me, she leaned close enough that no one else could hear. You think owning this place makes you untouchable? I met her eyes. No. She smiled faintly. Wait until people find out how you really built your company. Then she stepped into the elevator. The doors closed. Most people would have dismissed the sentence as another threat. I couldn't. Because reputation was the foundation of everything I had built. My clients trusted me with public safety. Cities trusted my engineering. Employees trusted my leadership. One believable accusation could damage all of that long before the truth ever caught up. After everyone left, I locked the penthouse and activated every internal security protocol available. Only one task remained. I walked to the demonstration area near the center of the living room where we tested prototype evacuation displays. Mounted discreetly above one of the ceiling beams sat a small environmental monitoring camera. Most visitors assumed it measured occupancy patterns. It did, but it also recorded activity whenever confidential prototypes were being demonstrated. I opened the archived footage from that afternoon. Guests wandered through the apartment. Champagne bottles appeared. Music played. Then, during the final 10 minutes before I arrived home, Victoria stepped into the frame beside a man I didn't recognize. She lowered her voice, but the room's directional microphone captured every word. We only need the bid model. The man asked quietly, what about Danielle? Victoria laughed. Once Harborline gets the numbers, she'll be too busy saving her company to fight me over the penthouse. I stopped the recording, then replayed it. Once, twice, 3 times. The words never changed. Neither did the conclusion. Until that moment, part of me still wanted to believe this had somehow remained a family conflict. A desperate sister. A father making terrible decisions. An argument over housing. That recording destroyed the last illusion. This wasn't about a place to live. It wasn't about heartbreak. It wasn't even about me. Someone had deliberately targeted confidential corporate information and used my family as the doorway. I picked up my phone. This time I wasn't calling building security. I wasn't calling my father. And I certainly wasn't calling Victoria. I opened my contacts and selected one name. Ezek's Naomi Price. Ezek, the commercial litigation attorney who had once helped protect my company during a patent dispute. When she answered, I spoke only one sentence. Naomi. I don't think I'm dealing with a family problem anymore. There was a brief silence. Then she replied calmly, good. Because from what you've just described, Ulir, you're dealing with corporate sabotage. And with those 4 words, everything changed. Naomi Price never panicked. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. While everyone else reacted to the loudest problem in the room, Naomi always searched for the one that could still destroy you. After everyone stopped shouting, we met the following morning in a private conference room, overlooking downtown Seattle. She arrived carrying 2 legal pads, a tablet, and a single cup of black coffee. Nothing about her suggested urgency, until I handed her the evidence. The flash drive, the access logs, the building security reports, Victoria's live stream, the recording mentioning Harborline, the handwritten note found on my desk. She spent nearly 40 minutes reading without interruption. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't ask whether my father understood what he'd done. She asked only questions that mattered. Has anyone besides you handled the original flash drive? No. Have the forensic images been verified? Yes. Multiple encrypted copies. 3. She gave the smallest nod. Good. Then she folded her hands together. This stopped being a property dispute yesterday. I thought so. She corrected gently. It actually stopped being a family matter the moment confidential engineering files left your laptop. She opened a clean page on her legal pad. Across the top she wrote 5 headings. Ves unauthorized access. Sicus trade secret misappropriation. Scus corporate interference. Duxi as identity fraud. Scus pest possible extortion. Seeing the words written together made everything feel heavier. I had walked into her office believing I was protecting my apartment. Instead, we were discussing crimes that could threaten an entire company. Naomi continued outlining the timeline. First, your father uses an emergency key to gain access. Second, Victoria copies confidential business information. She publicly pressures you to surrender your residence. Fourth, evidence suggests communication with a competing bidder. She looked up. Danielle. These events aren't independent. They're coordinated. I knew she was right. Deep down, I had known since hearing Victoria mention Harborline. Still, hearing someone else say it aloud removed the last trace of denial. What happens now? Naomi answered immediately. We preserve every piece of evidence. We notify Meridian before anyone else does. I felt my stomach tighten. Our biggest client. Our prospective client. She corrected. And yes, if they discover a security incident through someone else, they'll question every assurance your company has ever made. But if I tell them now, they may cancel the contract. They might. She didn't soften the truth. But honesty gives you a chance. Concealment removes it. For several seconds I stared at the city outside the conference room window. Nearly $18 million. 43 employees. Years of work. All suddenly balanced on one decision. Naomi waited patiently. Finally I nodded. We tell them. I was hoping you'd say that. She immediately drafted 3 documents. A formal preservation notice, a cease and desist letter, and an incident disclosure addressed to Meridian's legal department. Every sentence was precise. Every allegation supported by evidence. No emotional language. No speculation. Just facts. Watching her work reminded me of engineering. Strong structures don't survive because they're dramatic. They survive because every load is calculated before pressure arrives. Before leaving the conference room, Naomi stopped beside the door. There is one more thing. What? Do not contact Victoria. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because once people realize evidence exists, they usually make one of 2 mistakes. They disappear. Or, she paused, they panic. And panic often creates the evidence you couldn't have found otherwise. I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not yet. By the end of that week, I would. Because Victoria's greatest mistake wasn't stealing confidential information. It was believing she could still manipulate me the same way she had manipulated our family for the last 10 years. Naomi had been right. Victoria panicked. She just didn't panic the way most people do. She became louder. 3 days after Meridian received our voluntary disclosure, my phone exploded with notifications before I had even finished breakfast. Victoria had posted another video. This one was different. No tears. No trembling voice. No carefully rehearsed heartbreak. She looked directly into the camera with complete confidence. I've stayed silent long enough. She paused dramatically. My sister built her company by stealing ideas from the people closest to her. Within minutes, thousands of people had already viewed the clip. The comments split almost immediately. Some defended me. Others demanded answers. A few insisted there had to be 2 sides to the story. I didn't respond. Neither did my company. Naomi had already warned me. The internet rewards speed. Courtrooms reward evidence. Those 2 things almost never arrive at the same time. Instead of opening social media again, I drove to the office. The atmosphere felt different the moment I walked inside. People stopped talking as I passed. Not because they believed Victoria. Because uncertainty makes everyone quieter. My executive assistant, Rachel, met me outside my office. Meridian's legal team is here. So soon. They arrived 20 minutes ago. I nodded once. Conference room B. 3 people waited inside. Their chief procurement officer, an attorney, and a cybersecurity specialist. None of them looked angry. They looked careful. That gave me hope. The attorney spoke first. Miss Carter. Thank you for notifying us immediately. Those 7 words eased a pressure I hadn't realized I was carrying. We've completed a preliminary review. He slid a folder across the table. Our analysts confirmed the copied files represent early engineering drafts, not the final submission. I quietly released the breath I'd been holding. The intrusion was serious, he continued, but your disclosure occurred before any compromised material appeared inside the active bidding process. The cybersecurity specialist leaned forward. We're more interested in how quickly your internal monitoring detected the breach. I blinked. I'm sorry? He smiled faintly. Most companies discover incidents weeks later. You identified unauthorized access within hours. You preserved forensic evidence. You disclosed voluntarily. He looked toward the others. Those are indicators of a mature security culture. For the first time since Victoria entered my penthouse, someone was evaluating my actions instead of her accusations. The procurement officer closed his notebook. We're not terminating your proposal. I stared at him. Instead, Meridian requested something unexpected, an independent audit, not because they distrusted us, because they wanted documentation proving the incident had been fully contained. I agreed immediately. After the meeting ended, Rachel stepped quietly into my office. There's something else. What? She placed a printed email on my desk. No sender, no signature, only one sentence. Withdraw from Meridian, or the next leak won't stop with engineering files. Aksha, no demand for money. No explanation, just a threat. I handed it directly to Naomi the moment she arrived. She read it once, then smiled. That surprised me. You're smiling. Yes. She slid the email into an evidence sleeve. Why? Because whoever wrote this just made a serious mistake. I don't understand. She tapped the page gently. Yesterday we had circumstantial evidence suggesting coordination. Today, she looked at me. Someone acknowledged the existence of future leaks. I read the sentence again. She was right. The writer had accidentally confirmed this wasn't a single isolated event. Someone expected additional stolen information, which meant someone believed there was still access. Naomi immediately contacted the forensic team. Within hours they traced the email through multiple anonymous servers. Not enough to identify the sender, but enough to establish something else. The original connection briefly passed through a wireless network, less than 3 blocks from Harborline Dynamics, regional headquarters. Still not proof, but no longer coincidence. That evening, while organizing another folder of evidence, Ethan called. I found Lucas. I straightened in my chair. Where? He agreed to meet. Why now? Ethan's voice became unusually serious. Because he says Victoria wasn't working alone. The room suddenly felt much smaller. What did he tell you? He won't discuss it over the phone. A long pause followed. Then Ethan added one final sentence. And Danielle. Bring Naomi. If Lucas is telling the truth, your father may have been manipulated from the very beginning. I looked at the growing stack of evidence spread across my desk. For days I had believed I was uncovering a conspiracy against my company. Now, it sounded as though someone had spent years carefully constructing one against my entire family. Lucas Warren looked nothing like the man I remembered from Victoria's social media. The expensive suits were gone. So was the effortless confidence. When Ethan and I met him in Naomi's conference room, he looked exhausted, not frightened, simply tired, like someone who had spent years carrying a secret that had finally become heavier than the consequences of telling it. He sat quietly until Naomi closed the door. Then he slid a thick envelope across the table. I don't expect anyone here to trust me. No, Naomi replied evenly, but we are interested in evidence. Lucas nodded. That's why I came. Inside the envelope were printed emails, phone records, bank transfers, and several screenshots of encrypted messaging conversations. I recognized Victoria's phone number immediately. The messages stretched back almost 4 years. Far longer than I expected. Lucas folded his hands together. You think Harborline recruited your sister? He shook his head. They didn't. She found them. Silence settled over the room. He continued. She learned years ago that companies pay enormous amounts for advance information. Not always directly, but through consultants, recruiters, subcontractors, shell firms. Naomi carefully organized the documents into chronological order. When did you first realize what she was doing? Lucas looked ashamed. Too late. He laughed bitterly. At first I thought she was networking. She asked harmless questions, deadlines, project names, meeting schedules. I assumed she was curious. He stopped speaking for a moment. Then confidential proposals started appearing inside competitor presentations. Ethan looked up. The Northline investigation. Lucas nodded. They suspected me. Weren't they right? No. I was careless. But I never sold anything. He pushed another page toward us. They found this after I resigned. The document listed multiple external storage devices connected to his home network. One serial number matched the flash drive now locked inside Naomi's evidence cabinet. The same drive. Just reformatted. Naomi looked directly at him. Victoria kept using it. Yes. She always said engineers never notice missing files. I closed my eyes briefly, not because the sentence surprised me, because it explained why she had walked so confidently into my office. This wasn't new. It was practiced. Lucas reached into his jacket pocket and removed one final item. A small digital voice recorder. I almost deleted this. Naomi accepted it carefully. What is it? The conversation that ended our relationship. She connected headphones first. Listened silently, then passed one earpiece to me. Victoria's voice filled the recording. Clear, calm, completely different from the emotional performances she posted online. Chore, people trust family more than passwords. Lucas answered quietly. Chore, this is getting dangerous. Victoria laughed. Chore, dangerous. Chore, Danielle still thinks Dad decides everything. Chore, she never notices who's really making the decisions. Every muscle in my body seemed to freeze. Naomi continued listening. Another sentence followed, one that changed everything. Tor, if Dad believes he's rescuing me, he'll open any door I ask. The recording ended. No shouting, no threats, just quiet certainty. For years, I believed my father had chosen Victoria over me. Now I understood something much more complicated. He had been manipulated too. Not innocent. His choices still mattered. But someone had learned exactly how to use his love against him. Naomi carefully placed the recorder into an evidence bag. This is substantial. Lucas nodded. I'm willing to testify. Why now? He looked directly at me. Because when she mentioned your company, I realized she wasn't stopping. I convinced myself Northline had been a mistake. I told myself she'd never do it again. His shoulders sagged. I was wrong. Ethan quietly closed his notebook. There's one more question. Lucas looked at him. Who's paying Harborline? Lucas hesitated, then slowly answered. Not Harborline. The room became completely still. What do you mean? I asked. He took a deep breath. Harborline doesn't know the source. They're buying information through an outside consultant. So they believe it's legitimate competitive intelligence. Naomi immediately understood the implication. Which means, Lucas finished the sentence. The person coordinating everything is still hidden. Not Victoria. Not my father. Not Harborline. Someone else. Someone who had stayed invisible while everyone else absorbed the risk. Naomi slowly stood. We're no longer preparing for civil litigation. She looked around the room. We're preparing for a criminal conspiracy investigation. And suddenly, the story became much bigger than my family ever imagined. 3 days later, everything unraveled. Not because we exposed Victoria. Because the person hiding behind her made one fatal mistake. Naomi had already forwarded every document to the appropriate investigators. Meridian's Internal Security Division, the Financial Crimes Task Force, and a federal team specializing in corporate trade secret theft. From that point forward, we stopped chasing answers. We started waiting for people to make mistakes. It didn't take long. At 6:42 on a Tuesday morning, Naomi called. They've executed the warrant. I sat upright immediately. Where? The consultant's office. So Lucas was right. Yes. She paused. And Danielle, they found your company's files. The room suddenly felt weightless. Not because I was relieved. Because, for the first time since Victoria walked into my penthouse, someone outside our circle had confirmed everything. By noon, investigators requested another meeting. This time the room felt very different. No uncertainty. No speculation. Only evidence. The lead investigator spread several photographs across the conference table. Computers. External drives. File cabinets. Among them sat a familiar black flash drive, the same model Victoria had plugged into my laptop. Except, they hadn't recovered one. They recovered 7, each labeled by hand. East Transit, each T as medical, Dawes asked commercial Izida energies at different industries, different victims. The investigator looked directly at me. Your company wasn't specifically targeted. I frowned. What do you mean? This organization collected confidential proposals from multiple engineering firms. They sold advanced market intelligence. Sometimes to competitors. Sometimes to investors. Sometimes to consulting firms. He pointed toward one folder. Your Meridian proposal was simply the newest acquisition. The realization landed harder than I expected. For weeks, I believed someone wanted to destroy me. Instead, I had simply become the next opportunity. That didn't make the betrayal smaller. It made it colder. Victoria hadn't chosen my company because she hated me. She chose it because she believed family provided easier access than strangers. Then the investigator opened another folder. Inside were printed banking records, wire transfers, consulting invoices, payments routed through shell companies. Several deposits ultimately reached an account belonging to Victoria. Another reached Lucas years earlier. One payment caught my attention immediately. Kias 8600. I stared at the amount. The exact same number. Naomi noticed my expression. What is it? I pointed silently. $8,600. The amount my father once insisted was only a temporary loan. The amount Victoria repeatedly claimed represented moving expenses. The amount that somehow appeared again. Only now, it was listed as compensation for competitive research services. My stomach tightened. The number had never been random. It had always been a payment. Not from my father. From the organization purchasing stolen information. Before anyone spoke again, another investigator entered the room carrying a sealed evidence envelope. We finished extracting the deleted audio. He placed a tablet on the table. You're going to want to hear this. The recording began. The consultant's voice came first. Professional. Calm. Can your father still access the apartment? Victoria answered without hesitation. He'll do whatever I ask. And your sister? A quiet laugh. Danielle still believes this is about family. She always wastes time trying to save relationships. By the time she realizes she's protecting a company, we'll already have what we need. The room fell completely silent. I didn't feel angry anymore, only clarity. For the first time, I heard myself exactly the way Victoria saw me. Not as a sister, not even as an enemy, as a predictable obstacle, someone whose kindness could be calculated into a business plan. The recording continued. Then another voice entered, one I recognized immediately. My father, I don't like this. Victoria answered softly. Dad, I'm only staying there. I promise. You trust me, don't you? The audio stopped. No one spoke. Finally, the investigator looked toward me. We don't believe your father understood the larger conspiracy. He appears to have been manipulated. Naomi nodded quietly. So did I. That afternoon my father asked to meet. Not at his house. Not at mine. At the small public park where he had taught me to ride a bicycle when I was 6 years old. He looked older than I had ever seen him. He didn't sit immediately. He simply handed me my old emergency key. I shouldn't have opened your door. His voice barely carried above the wind. I spent years believing helping one daughter meant asking the other to understand. He swallowed hard. I never noticed. I had stopped asking what was true. I held the key in my hand, the same one he had confidently tossed to Victoria. It felt strangely light. I'm sorry, he whispered. Not the apology from years earlier. Not F, she made a mistake. Not I let it go. S, just 2 words. Without excuses, without conditions. I nodded slowly. I believe you're sorry? He closed his eyes. But believing you doesn't erase what happened. He nodded. I know. That was the moment I realized something. Forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. One belongs to the heart. The other must be earned through actions. My father finally understood that. Victoria never did. 2 weeks later, she signed a civil settlement. Criminal charges were formally filed against the consulting network, and multiple companies joined the investigation. The penthouse had never really been the prize. It had simply been the easiest door to open. The difference now was that no one would ever mistake it for an unlocked one again. The investigation officially lasted just under 8 months. Healing took much longer. People often imagine justice as one dramatic moment. A verdict. A confession. Someone finally admitting they were wrong. Real life rarely works that way. Most of the time, justice arrives quietly. One document, one ruling, one verified fact after another, until the story that once sounded impossible becomes the only version supported by evidence. Meridian never withdrew our proposal. Instead, they postponed the final award until the independent cybersecurity audit was complete. At first, I feared the delay would cost us everything. 43 employees depended on that contract. Several had relocated their families, believing the project would move forward. Others had postponed accepting offers from larger firms, because they believed in what we were building together. Every day I walked through the office wondering whether my family's choices were about to become everyone else's burden. 3 months later, the audit concluded. The report stretched over hundreds of pages. Every access log, every forensic image, every device connection, every preserved backup. The investigators reached one conclusion. The breach had been detected almost immediately. The compromised files had never entered our production environment. The company's response exceeded industry standards. For the first time since all of this began, I cried. Not because we had won, because dozens of innocent people no longer had to pay for decisions they never made. 2 weeks later, Meridian called. We had been awarded the contract. When the announcement became public, our office didn't celebrate with champagne or speeches. Instead, the engineering department quietly returned to work. People smiled. Someone ordered pizza. Rachel placed a handwritten congratulations card on my desk signed by every employee. The final message at the bottom simply read, "Thank you for protecting all of us." I kept that card, not because it celebrated success, because it reminded me why boundaries matter. They rarely protect only one person. They protect everyone connected to them. Over the following months, we invested heavily in new security systems. Multi-factor authentication became mandatory across every department. Portable storage devices were permanently disabled unless approved through dedicated forensic procedures. Visitor access changed completely. Even family members signed in like everyone else. Some people joked that the office had become impossible to enter. I smiled every time I heard it. Good. Trust should never depend on assumptions again. One afternoon, while reviewing architectural models with my engineering team, Rachel knocked gently on my office door. A letter arrived. No return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. "Dad." I waited until everyone had gone home before opening it. The letter wasn't long. Only 2 handwritten pages. No explanations. No attempts to justify his choices. Just memories. He wrote about teaching me how to ride a bicycle, helping me build my first model bridge out of popsicle sticks, watching me stay awake until midnight solving calculus problems because I refused to leave them unfinished. Near the end, one paragraph stood out. "Tore somewhere along the way. I confused your strength with permission to ask more from you than from anyone else. The tears that mistake cost me years I can never get back." I folded the letter carefully. For the first time, I believed he understood what the real betrayal had been. Not the apartment, not the investigation, not even the stolen files. It was expecting one child to carry burdens simply because she had always proven capable of surviving them. Strength should inspire respect, not exploitation. That night, I placed his letter inside the same drawer where I kept every document that had changed my life. Not because it erased the past, because it acknowledged it honestly, and sometimes, honesty is the first brick required before anything worth rebuilding can begin. About 5 months after the investigation began, something happened that surprised me more than any courtroom hearing ever could. Victoria asked to see me. Not through Dad. Not through another relative. Through her attorney. Naomi forwarded the request without comment. At the bottom of her email, she added only one sentence. "The decision is entirely yours." I stared at that line for a long time. For most of my life, other people had decided when I should forgive, when I should compromise, when I should be the bigger person. This time, no one expected anything from me. I finally understood what real choice felt like. After thinking about it for 2 days, I agreed to a single meeting. 1 hour. Naomi present. At her office. Nothing more. Victoria arrived 10 minutes early. She looked different. Not dramatically, just smaller. The confidence that had carried her through every argument seemed to have dissolved into quiet exhaustion. When she entered the conference room, she didn't hug me, she didn't cry. She simply sat down. For almost a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "I don't expect forgiveness." I nodded. "Good." Another silence. Then she surprised me. "I've spent months trying to understand when everything became like this." She laughed softly. I kept blaming Harborline, the consultant, Dad, my ex. She looked down at her hands. But eventually I ran out of other people. Naomi remained silent, allowing the conversation to unfold naturally. Victoria continued. "I think." She searched for the words. "I got used to believing that if something belonged to you, it would eventually belong to me too." The honesty caught me off guard. Not because it excused anything. Because it was the first truthful sentence I had heard from her in years. She wiped quietly at her eyes. "Every time Dad rescued me, I stopped learning how to rescue myself." No one interrupted. She reached into her bag and placed a small envelope on the table. I found this while packing. Inside was my original building access card. The one she had stolen from my wallet. It had been scratched along one edge but still worked. Seeing it there felt strangely symbolic. Such a small piece of plastic. Yet somehow it represented years of blurred boundaries. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quietly enough that I almost missed it. I believed she meant it. But belief wasn't enough. "I appreciate the apology," I answered gently. "But we're not rebuilding a relationship today." She nodded immediately. "I know, I don't deserve that." "No," I corrected softly. "This isn't about what you deserve. It's about what I need." For years I would have apologized after saying those words. This time, I didn't. Victoria gave a sad smile. "You're different." I thought about that, then slowly shook my head. "No. I think this is who I was before I spent years believing boundaries were selfish." The meeting ended 23 minutes later. No dramatic reconciliation. No promises to call. No emotional embrace. Just two sisters walking out of the same office through different doors. And somehow, that felt healthier than pretending everything had been repaired. A few weeks afterward, Naomi called with another update. The civil settlement had been finalized. The consulting network accepted substantial financial penalties. Multiple executives faced criminal proceedings. Victoria agreed to cooperate fully with investigators. Part of that agreement required her to testify truthfully about everyone involved. Naomi closed the file in front of her. "Legally, this is the last time you'll need to think about them." I smiled. "I don't think that's true." She looked at me curiously. "There will always be memories. There will always be consequences. But—" I paused. "They don't get to decide what those memories mean anymore." That evening, I walked through my penthouse just before sunset. The damaged flooring had been replaced. The locks upgraded. The office reorganized. Everything looked almost exactly the way it had before Victoria ever stepped inside. Almost. One thing had changed forever. This place no longer felt like something I needed to defend. It felt like somewhere I had finally learned I was allowed to belong. Almost a year after everything began, life finally stopped revolving around court dates, forensic reports, and attorney meetings. One ordinary Tuesday morning, I stood in the lobby of Aldercrown Towers, watching a group of young engineers touring the building. Our Meridian project had officially entered its implementation phase. Several universities had begun sending graduate students to observe how adaptive evacuation systems were integrated into existing infrastructure. One of the interns stopped beside a digital control panel and smiled. "I read your original research paper in school." For a moment, I wasn't sure she was talking to me. She continued. "I never thought I'd actually get to work on one of these systems." I thanked her, but the conversation stayed with me long after the group disappeared upstairs. There had been a time when I believed my greatest achievement would be proving my family wrong. Instead, it became helping people I had never even met. That realization changed something inside me. Success built around revenge always has an ending. Success built around purpose keeps growing. Several weeks later, our company announced the opening of a scholarship for women pursuing structural engineering and emergency systems design. Rachel suggested naming it after me. I declined immediately. Instead, I chose another name. The Eleanor Carter Innovation Fellowship. My grandmother, the woman who believed in my future long before anyone else could see it. At the dedication ceremony, I told the audience only one story. Not about the investigation. Not about the lawsuit. Not about my family. I spoke about a little girl building bridges from popsicle sticks on her grandmother's kitchen table. Because that memory belonged to me before anyone ever tried to rewrite my life. Dad attended quietly from the back row. After everyone else had left, he approached me carrying a small cardboard box. "I found these in the attic." Inside were dozens of old notebooks. Every engineering sketch I had drawn as a teenager. Bridge designs, building layouts, handwritten calculations. Even a crumpled page titled, "My Future Company." I laughed softly. "I completely forgot about these." He smiled sadly. "I didn't. I just forgot to remind you how proud I was." Neither of us tried to repair the past with words. Some things deserve silence. Not because they're unimportant. Because they can't be rushed. Before leaving, Dad stopped beside the scholarship plaque. "Your grandmother would have loved this." I looked at her name engraved beneath the glass. I think she already did. That evening, Owen and I walked through the nearly empty office after everyone had gone home. Lights from the city reflected across the windows. The building felt peaceful again. Not because difficult things had never happened there. Because they no longer owned the space. Owen smiled as we passed the conference room where Naomi had first spread out the evidence. You know. What? I don't think this story was ever about a penthouse. I laughed. No, it wasn't. It wasn't even about the flash drive. He waited. So what was it about? I looked across the office where young engineers had begun preparing tomorrow's presentations. People who trusted me. People whose futures deserved protection. Then I answered. It was about learning that protecting your boundaries isn't selfish. It's part of protecting everyone who depends on you. For years, I believed saying yes made me compassionate. Now I understood something very different. Every unnecessary yes eventually becomes permission for someone else to ignore your no. The next morning, before beginning work, I unlocked my office. On the bookshelf behind my desk sat 3 simple objects. My grandmother's handwritten letter, the scratched building access card Victoria had returned, and the original emergency key my father had quietly handed back to me in the park. I never threw any of them away. Not because I wanted daily reminders of betrayal, because each represented a different lesson. One reminded me to dream, one reminded me to protect, one reminded me that trust, once broken, must be earned, not assumed. As sunlight filled the office, I slipped the emergency key into a small wooden box and closed the lid. Not to hide the past, to acknowledge that it no longer controlled the future. For the first time in many years. When I locked the door behind me that evening, I wasn't securing a building. I was protecting a life that finally belonged entirely to me. People still ask me what happened to the penthouse. Did I sell it? Did I move away? Did I ever feel comfortable living there again? The answer surprises most of them. I stayed, not because I wanted to prove a point, because leaving would have allowed one final lie to become true. For a long time, I believed that home was simply the place where the people you loved welcomed you. Now I understand something different. Home is the place where your boundaries are respected, where your peace isn't negotiated, where your no carries the same weight as your yes. The apartment never betrayed me. People did. Walls don't manipulate. Doors don't guilt-trip you. Keys don't decide who deserves your future. People make those choices, and people have to live with them. Looking back, I don't think the hardest moment was finding Victoria inside my bedroom, or discovering the stolen engineering files, or even learning that my father had unknowingly opened the door for someone else's plan. The hardest moment came much later. It was realizing how easily I had mistaken being dependable for being responsible for everyone else's happiness. Those aren't the same thing. Responsibility means honoring your commitments. Dependability means people know they can trust your word. Neither requires sacrificing your dignity. Neither requires financing another person's choices. And neither requires accepting betrayal simply because it comes from someone who shares your last name. The Meridian Project is now operating in buildings across multiple cities. Every time I visit one of those sites and watch thousands of people safely move through spaces my team helped design, I'm reminded that the future almost disappeared because I was afraid of disappointing my family. I'm grateful it didn't. Not because my company survived, because I finally did. People sometimes ask whether I ever forgave Victoria. The truth is, forgiveness isn't something I can measure the way I measure engineering calculations. Some days I feel compassion. Some days I still feel sadness. But every day, I choose not to let what happened define who I become. That's enough for me. My relationship with my father continues one conversation at a time. Slowly, honestly. Without pretending the past never happened. Trust isn't rebuilt through promises. It's rebuilt through consistency. And consistency always takes time. If there's one lesson this journey taught me, it's this: the people who truly love you won't ask you to disappear, so they can feel comfortable. They won't demand access to your life simply because they believe they're entitled to it. And they won't call your boundaries cruel, simply because those boundaries prevent them from crossing a line. If you've listened to my story and recognized pieces of your own life, if you've ever been told you're selfish because you protected something you worked hard to build, if you've ever felt guilty simply for saying, "This belongs to me," I hope you'll remember one thing. Boundaries don't destroy healthy relationships. They reveal unhealthy ones. The day I called building security, I thought I was protecting a penthouse. I wasn't. I was protecting my future. Everything beautiful that came afterward, the Meridian Project, the scholarship, rebuilding my relationship with my father, mentoring young engineers, and finally living without constant fear of someone else's expectations, began with one decision. I stopped apologizing for protecting what was mine. Thank you for spending this time with me and walking through this journey. If this story resonated with you, I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your own boundaries? Share your experience in the comments. Someone reading your words may realize they're not alone. And if stories about resilience, family dynamics, personal growth, justice, and rebuilding a life after betrayal speak to you, consider subscribing for more stories like this. Until next time, protect your peace. Protect your work, protect your future. Because the strongest foundation you'll ever build is the one that teaches the people around you exactly where your boundaries begin. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.